On my 35th birthday, my father slammed his heavy crystal scotch glass onto the white linen tablecloth of a five-star restaurant and announced to the entire room that he should have stopped at one kid. My sister laughed, clinking her champagne flute with her husband. My mother simply smoothed her designer dress and told me to stop embarrassing them. I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. I just paid the $2,400 bill, walked out into the crisp Atlanta night, and executed a quiet financial protocol that would leave them all completely bankrupt by the end of the month. My name is Kendra. I am 35 years old, and I work as a senior wealth portfolio manager. Before I continue this story about how I dismantled my toxic family's fake empire overnight, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that blood does not give anyone a free pass to disrespect you. The evening started like every other family obligation I had endured for the past decade. We were at one of the most exclusive steakhouses in Buckhead, a place where the lighting is dim, the steaks are dry-aged, and the wine list requires a second mortgage. I had foolishly hoped that tonight would be different. It was my birthday, after all. I had spent the entire week navigating high-stakes corporate portfolios and managing millions of dollars for my clients. I just wanted a peaceful dinner with my parents, my younger sister Jasmine, and her husband Trent. But peace was never an option in our family, especially when the check arrived. The waiter, a polite young man in a crisp white shirt, approached our table carrying the black leather booklet. Without a moment of hesitation, he bypassed my father, who sat at the head of the table radiating the false authority of a corporate giant. The waiter bypassed Trent, who was leaning back in his chair with the smug satisfaction of a man who had just consumed 3 lobster tails. Instead, the waiter placed the booklet directly in front of me. I opened it. The total was $2,400. My eyes scanned the itemized list. 4 bottles of premium Cabernet, seafood towers, tomahawk ribeyes. I had ordered a simple salmon fillet and 1 glass of water. Trent chuckled, adjusting the cuffs of his blazer. "Well," he said, his voice dripping with that irritating, unearned confidence he always carried. "Looks like being a single workaholic finally pays off for the family, right, Kendra? Happy birthday to you." Trent was white, 34, and chronically unemployed, though he preferred the term freelance consultant. He loved nothing more than making condescending jokes about my life, conveniently forgetting that my so-called workaholic lifestyle was the only reason his credit cards had not been declined all year. I looked at Trent, then at my sister Jasmine. She was 32, dressed in an emerald silk dress that I knew cost more than her rent. She was busy checking her reflection in her phone screen, completely unbothered by her husband's disrespect. I closed the leather booklet and slid it toward the center of the table. "Since it is my birthday dinner," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I assumed we were splitting this. The silence that fell over the table was deafening. The soft jazz playing through the restaurant speakers suddenly felt very loud. My father, Reginald, froze. He was a man obsessed with image, a former mid-level manager who spent his retirement parading around Atlanta high society as if he owned the city. His jaw tightened. He picked up his scotch glass and slammed it down so hard the silverware rattled against the plates. Several heads turned from the neighboring booths. "You have always been stingy, Kendra." My father spat, his deep voice booming across the quiet dining room. "I swear, looking at you right now, I should have stopped at one kid." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. A coldness washed over me, starting from the crown of my head and settling deep into my chest. This was not a slip of the tongue. This was how he truly felt. I was not his daughter. I was his wallet. I was the financial safety net he desperately needed but bitterly resented. Jasmine let out a sharp, mocking laugh, raising her glass toward Trent, as if my father had just delivered a brilliant punchline at a comedy show. I turned my gaze to my mother, Brenda. If there was ever a moment for her to be a mother, to defend her eldest child on her own birthday, this was it. Instead, she leaned forward, her face twisted in a scowl of deep disapproval. She was a woman who worshipped the appearance of perfection, a pillar of her church community, who cared far more about what strangers thought than how her children felt. Do not make a scene. Kendra, my mother, hissed, her voice a harsh whisper. Do not embarrass us in front of these people. Just pay the bill and show some respect to your father. Show respect. Those two words echoed in my mind, drowning out the background noise of the restaurant. For 6 years I had shown them nothing but respect. For 6 years I had quietly funneled my corporate bonuses into their joint accounts to keep their massive mortgage from defaulting. I had paid for Jasmine's lavish destination wedding. I had covered Trent's endless strings of bad investments. I had funded the very lifestyle they were currently using to look down on me. And in return, I was publicly humiliated and told I should not exist. I did not argue. I did not explain myself. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out my heavy metal black card. I placed it gently on top of the bill, catching the waiter's eye as he hovered nervously a few feet away. Take care of this, please, I told him calmly, adding a generous tip that matched the enormous total. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored trousers. I picked up my wool coat and my bag. My father smirked, crossing his arms, clearly thinking he had won. He thought he had successfully bullied me into submission like he always did. Jasmine rolled her eyes and went back to scrolling on her phone, already bored with the drama. Thanks for the dinner, Kendra Trent called out loudly as I turned my back to them. I did not look back. I walked out of the restaurant, the heavy glass doors closing behind me, sealing them inside their fragile bubble of delusion. The cool night air hit my face, and with every step I took toward the valet stand, the thick fog of familial obligation finally lifted. I got into my car, gripping the leather steering wheel. I was completely silent. There were no tears, no gasping sobs, only a profound and terrifying clarity. I thought about the thousands of hours I had worked, the late nights analyzing market trends, the promotions I had fought for in a ruthless industry, all to ensure my family never had to struggle. They hated that they needed me, so they punished me for providing. I pressed the ignition button. The engine purred to life. I pulled out onto the busy road, the city lights blurring past my windows. I reached for the Bluetooth console and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice. Good evening, Ms. Davis. The voice of my lead private banker answered, perfectly professional despite the late hour. How can we assist you tonight? I need you to execute a full freeze on the family trust. I said, my voice steady and unrecognizable even to myself. The banker paused for a fraction of a second. The entire trust, ma'am. Yes, I replied, turning the steering wheel sharply as I navigated the downtown traffic. Every single sub-account. Liquidate the joint checking accounts attached to my parents' mortgage. Cut off the supplemental black card under my sister's name. Remove Reginald and Brenda Davis as authorized users on all secondary portfolios. Route every available cent back to my primary holding corporation. Understood, Ms. Davis. This will take effect immediately. Will there be anything else? Yes, I said, pulling up to a red light. Protocol 0. Lock it all down. If anyone but me calls to access those funds, flag it as fraud. I ended the call. The traffic light turned green. As I pressed the accelerator, a small, genuine smile finally touched my lips. My father wanted to act like a self-made billionaire who did not need his eldest daughter. Tomorrow morning, he was going to find out exactly what it feels like to be completely broke. I drove straight from the steakhouse to the high-rise condo my parents loved to brag about. At every church function and country club mixer, my mother would tell anyone who would listen that they generously allowed their single daughter to live in their premier investment property. What she conveniently left out of those conversations was that I had paid the entire down payment, the monthly homeowners association fees, and the property taxes for the last 4 years. The deed was in their name to boost their credit, but the money was entirely mine. Tonight, they could have their empty walls back. The condo was immaculate and sterile, completely stripped of my personal taste, because my mother had insisted on hiring her own decorator to maintain the family image. I walked directly into the master bedroom and pulled a single leather overnight bag from the top shelf of the closet. I packed only the absolute essentials. 3 tailored suits for the office, a few casual outfits, my skincare routine, and my corporate laptop. I deliberately left behind the expensive diamond earrings my father had gifted me 2 Christmases ago, mostly because I knew he had purchased them using the supplementary credit card linked to my primary account. I walked into the chef's kitchen and placed my heavy set of keys on the pristine marble island. Right next to the keys, I set down my personal cell phone. I knew that the moment my private banking team executed Protocol Zero and sent out the automated account closure alerts at dawn, that phone would not stop ringing. I had absolutely no intention of being on the receiving end of their outrage. I walked out of the front door, pulling the heavy oak shut behind me, and listened to the deadbolt click into place. I spent the remainder of the night at a luxury hotel downtown, sleeping deeper and better than I had in a decade. The next morning, the city of Atlanta was bathed in bright golden sunlight, and I was already busy moving on with my life. By 9 o'clock, I was sitting in the sleek glass office of a high-end real estate broker. I signed a 12-month lease for a stunning penthouse apartment overlooking Piedmont Park. When the broker politely asked for proof of income and a standard deposit, I simply wired the 6-figure security deposit and the entire first year of rent in full directly from my private corporate holding account. The broker smiled warmly and handed me the keys immediately. My next stop was a boutique tech store down the street where I purchased a brand new smartphone and established a private, unlisted number. After picking up a black coffee from a quiet cafe, I sat down at a corner table and opened my corporate laptop to check my work inbox. Sitting right there in my personal folder were 47 new emails. Almost all of them were from my sister Jasmine. I clicked on the first message, which had been sent at 7:15 in the morning. It was written in her usual demanding and entitled tone. Kendra, you need to call the bank immediately. Trent tried to run his black card and it is not working. We are sitting at the luxury dealership and the sales team is looking at us like we are criminals. Fix this bank glitch right now. I took a slow sip of my hot coffee and smiled. Trent had been talking about leasing a brand new Porsche for weeks, bragging to our cousins about a massive consulting bonus that did not actually exist. He had fully planned to use my money to walk out of that showroom with the keys to a $100,000 sports car. Instead, he was standing under those bright dealership lights with a declined card and a severely bruised ego. As I scrolled through the inbox, the emails escalated rapidly in both panic and aggression. By 8:30, Jasmine was frantic. Kendra, why is your phone going straight to voicemail? The bank manager is telling Dad the accounts are frozen and he refuses to override it without your signature. Call me right now. 10 minutes later, another email arrived stating that our mother was having a panic attack on the living room floor. By the 47th email, the tone had shifted entirely from panic to pure venom. The subject line was typed entirely in capital letters, reading, "You are dead to us." The body of the email was brief and sharp. Dad knows what you did. He is on his way to your office right now to teach you a lesson about respect. You better be ready to grovel. I closed my laptop, a profound sense of satisfaction settling warm in my chest. I threw away my empty coffee cup and drove straight to my wealth management firm. I swiped my security badge and took the private elevator up to the executive floor. My office was a quiet sanctuary of glass and dark mahogany, a stark contrast to the chaotic family dynamic I had just permanently severed. I had barely settled into my ergonomic leather chair when the red emergency light on my desk phone began to blink. It was the front desk security team calling from the lobby. Ms. Davis, the head of security, said, his voice tight with tension. Your father is down here in the lobby. He bypassed the reception desk and is demanding to see you right now. He is causing quite a public disturbance. Put the lobby camera feed on my monitor, I replied calmly. The screen flickered to life, showing the expansive marble lobby of my firm. There was my father, Reginald, his face flushed red with absolute rage. He was wearing his best tailored suit, the very one I had paid for last spring, and he was shouting aggressively at 2 muscular security guards who were firmly blocking his path to the elevators. I am Reginald Davis, he bellowed, pointing a furious finger at the guards. My daughter works in this building. You better get out of my way before I call the board of directors and have both of your jobs. He was putting on a loud performance for an audience, hoping to intimidate the wealthy clients and white-collar professionals walking past. He desperately wanted to shame me into submission. He fully expected me to rush downstairs, apologize profusely for the misunderstanding, and unfreeze his lavish life. I pressed the intercom button on my desk console, routing my voice directly to the front desk overhead speaker system. Dad, I said, my voice echoing clearly across the grand marble lobby. Reginald stopped shouting instantly and looked around, locating the small speaker mounted above the reception desk. Kendra, he barked back, his voice dripping with his usual condescension. Get down here right now. You have exactly 3 seconds to fix whatever childish game you are playing with the bank before I drag you out of this building myself. I leaned back in my chair, watching his angry face on the monitor. I moved out of the condo at 2 in the morning, I said smoothly, ensuring every person in the lobby could hear my steady tone. I left the keys and the phone on the kitchen island. There is no game here. The bank accounts belong exclusively to me, and I have simply decided to stop funding your lifestyle. Reginald's eyes widened in genuine disbelief. He stepped closer to the speaker, his fists clenched tight at his sides. You ungrateful brat, he spat. We let you live in that condo. We gave you everything. If you do not turn those accounts back on this second, I will hire a lawyer and legally seize your grandmother's estate. You know I have the power to do it. I will leave you with absolutely nothing. I watched the thick veins bulging in his neck, completely unbothered by his empty threats. Escort him out, I told the security team over my private headset. If he steps foot on this corporate property again, call the police immediately and press charges for trespassing. The 2 large guards stepped forward, each grabbing one of my father's arms. For a split second, Reginald looked completely shocked, unable to comprehend that his absolute authority over me had completely vanished. As they physically dragged him backward toward the revolving glass doors, he continued to shout wild threats, but the thick, soundproof glass quickly muffled his voice into nothing. The lobby slowly returned to its usual quiet elegance. I turned off the monitor, pulled a fresh stack of high-net-worth client portfolios toward me, and got to work. The war had officially begun, but for the first time in my entire life, I was holding all the ammunition. 2 days passed in a blissful, uninterrupted silence. My new penthouse felt like an actual sanctuary, completely devoid of the suffocating weight of my family and their endless demands. I was thriving at work, moving millions of dollars across international markets with a clear head. I genuinely thought they had finally understood the new reality. I was wrong. On Thursday afternoon, my firm sponsored a high-society charity luncheon at the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Atlanta. I was wearing a tailored ivory suit, networking with other female executives and enjoying the elegant atmosphere. After the event concluded, I stepped out onto the grand circular driveway to wait for the valet to bring my car. Kendra. I recognized the sharp, disapproving tone instantly. I turned around to see my mother Brenda marching up the driveway. She was dressed in her Sunday best, wearing a wide-brimmed navy hat and her signature string of pearls. She looked completely out of place among the corporate crowd, but her face was set in a mask of righteous indignation. She marched right up to me and grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my silk sleeve. "How dare you?" she hissed, keeping her voice low but trembling with fury. "How dare you humiliate your father in front of your coworkers? Have you lost your mind?" I calmly reached down and peeled her fingers off my arm one by one. "I am at a professional event, Mother. I suggest you lower your voice." She scoffed, crossing her arms tightly. "You do not get to dictate how I speak to you. You are tearing this family apart over a silly joke. A good black woman honors her parents, Kendra. The Lord sees what you are doing. You cut off your sister." Trent had to endure the ultimate embarrassment of walking out of that dealership with nothing. "Jasmine is crying herself to sleep. You need to apologize to Trent, call the bank and fix this mess today." I stared at her. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. She was standing outside a luxury hotel, trying to use respectability politics and religious guilt to force me back into financial submission. She truly cared more about her son-in-law getting a shiny new Porsche than she cared about her own daughter's dignity. "Mother," I said, my voice as cold as ice, "you really should not be wasting your energy worrying about Trent and his car lease." "And why is that?" she demanded, her chin raised in defiance. "Because you have much bigger problems," I replied, stepping closer so only she could hear me. "You should be worrying about where you are going to live next month." Her confident expression faltered. "What are you talking about?" "I stopped paying your mortgage on Monday night," I told her plainly. "That beautiful 5-bedroom house you love showing off to your church friends. The one you tell everyone my father bought with his brilliant business investments. The bank is going to nail a 30-day foreclosure notice to your mahogany front door by the end of the month." Brenda turned pale, the color completely drained from her face beneath her expensive makeup. "You are lying," she stammered. "Your father has a massive investment portfolio. We do not need your little contributions to keep our house." I smiled a sad, pitying smile. "Mom, I am the portfolio. For 6 years, my corporate bonuses have been the only thing keeping that house out of the hands of the bank. Your husband is entirely broke, and as of this week, so are you." My mother gasped loudly. She clutched her pearls, her eyes darting around to see if anyone was watching, and then she did what she always did when backed into a corner. She played the victim. She let out a dramatic cry, her knees buckling as she faked a fainting spell, collapsing against a heavy marble pillar near the entrance. Several guests turned to look in shock. The valet rushed over, looking panicked. "Ma'am, do you need a doctor?" I handed the valet a $50 bill. "She is just dehydrated," I said smoothly. "Get her a glass of ice water and a taxi." My car pulled up at that exact moment. I slipped into the driver's seat, leaving my mother leaning against the marble pillar, completely exposed to the judgment of the very high society crowd she spent her entire life trying to impress. When I arrived back at my office, the red message light on my desk phone was blinking frantically. I pressed play on the voicemail. It was my father. His voice was unrecognizable, completely unhinged and shaking with rage. "Kendra, you vindictive little brat!" Reginald screamed into the receiver. "I just got off the phone with my financial advisor. He told me the accounts are completely frozen. He said he cannot access my money without your authorization. I do not know what kind of illegal fraud you pulled to get your name on my hard-earned investments, but you have made the biggest mistake of your life." I listened to the recording, absolutely fascinated by the depth of his delusion. He genuinely believed the money was his. He had spent the last 6 years living in such a thick bubble of arrogance that he never once questioned why his financial advisor, a man I had personally hired, was funneling my paychecks to cover his massive debts. He actually believed he was a self-made millionaire. The voicemail continued, his tone turning venomous. "I am not playing games with you anymore, Kendra. I have hired a lawyer. We are suing you for financial fraud and embezzlement. I am going to take everything you own. You will be ruined by the time I am done with you." The message ended with a sharp click. I did not panic. I did not feel an ounce of fear. Instead, I picked up my cell phone and dialed the number for Valerie. Valerie was not just my best friend. She was one of the most ruthless corporate attorneys in the state of Georgia. "Hey, Kendra." Valerie answered cheerfully. "What is going on, Valerie?" "I need you to clear your schedule for next week," I said, looking out my window at the sprawling city skyline. "My father and Trent are suing me for financial fraud. They want to go to war over a trust fund that does not actually exist." Valerie let out a sharp, genuine laugh over the phone. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice dripping with lethal legal anticipation. "They have absolutely no idea who they are messing with. Tell them we will see them at the deposition." I had barely settled into my new morning routine when the peace was completely shattered. My firm occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek glass high-rise in the heart of the Atlanta financial district. The atmosphere was always hushed, highly professional, and dripping with quiet money. We managed portfolios for professional athletes, tech industry founders, and old money estates. It was absolutely not the kind of place where people raised their voices or caused public scenes. My desk phone rang. It was not the standard gentle chime of an internal department transfer. It was the harsh and rapid ring of the emergency security line from the main lobby downstairs. I picked up the receiver and answered simply. "This is Kendra, Ms. Davis," the voice on the other end said. It was David, our head of building security. He sounded tense, which was incredibly rare for a man who had previously managed security for a federal courthouse. "I sincerely apologize for the interruption, but we have a situation down here at the main reception desk. A man claiming to be your father bypassed the visitor checkpoint. He is refusing to sign in and is demanding to see you immediately. He is causing a significant public disturbance." I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second and took a slow, measured breath. Reginald had actually done it. He had taken Jasmine's frantic phone calls about the declined credit cards and decided the best course of action was to storm my workplace like he was the chief executive officer of my company. "Put the lobby camera feed on my primary monitor," I told David. "And do not let him pass the security turnstiles under any circumstances." My computer screen flickered, replacing the stock market ticker with a high-definition live video feed of the expansive marble lobby. There he was, my father, Reginald Davis. He was wearing a custom-tailored navy suit that I had paid for last Christmas. He was standing with his chest puffed out aggressively, pointing his finger at the young receptionist who looked visibly terrified. "I do not need a visitor badge," my father bellowed. His deep, booming voice echoed off the imported marble walls and clearly picked up on the security microphones. "I am Reginald Davis. My daughter is a senior portfolio manager in this exact building. You work for her, which means you work for me. Now open these glass gates before I have your job." 2 large security guards, including David, stepped firmly between my father and the receptionist's desk. They held their hands up in a placating gesture, trying their best to de-escalate the situation. Sir David said firmly, "You need to step back right now. We are contacting Ms. Davis, but you absolutely cannot speak to our staff that way." My father scoffed loudly, looking at the security guards as if they were dirt beneath his expensive Italian leather shoes. "Do you know who I am?" he demanded, using his classic intimidation tactic. "I am a man of immense influence in this city. I will call the board of directors right now and have this entire security team replaced by the end of the day. Get out of my way." He was putting on a massive theatrical performance. This was his signature move. Whenever he felt his authority slipping, he compensated by being the loudest and most aggressive person in the room. He fully expected me to rush down the elevators, apologize profusely in front of my colleagues to save face, and immediately unfreeze his bank accounts to make the public embarrassment stop. He thought my professional reputation was my weak point. He truly believed I would bend to his will just to avoid a corporate scandal. He thought wrong. I leaned forward and pressed the heavy silver intercom button on my desk console. This button routed my voice directly to the overhead speaker system in the main lobby, a feature usually reserved for building-wide emergency announcements. "Dad," I said. My voice was completely calm, steady, and amplified through the speakers, cutting through his shouting instantly. Reginald froze. He whipped his head around, looking up at the high ceiling, trying to locate the source of my voice. The few wealthy clients and executives walking through the lobby stopped in their tracks, turning their full attention to the unfolding drama. Kendra, my father, barked back, staring fiercely at a security camera mounted in the upper corner of the room. "Get down here right now. You have exactly 3 seconds to fix whatever childish game you are playing with the bank before I drag you out of this building myself. You are embarrassing this family." I watched his furious face on the monitor. The sheer audacity of his statement was almost funny. He was the one screaming in a corporate lobby like a lunatic, yet I was the embarrassment. "I am not coming down," I replied smoothly, ensuring every single person in that lobby could hear my unwavering tone. "And there is no game here. I moved out of the family condo at 2 in the morning. I left the keys and the phone on the kitchen island. The bank accounts belong exclusively to me. I earned every single cent of that money, and I have simply decided to stop funding your extravagant lifestyle. Reginald's eyes widened in pure shock. The color rushed rapidly to his face, turning his skin a deep shade of furious red. He could not comprehend that I was openly defying him. I was stripping away his false narrative of being a wealthy, successful provider right in front of a live audience. "You ungrateful brat," he spat, taking a highly aggressive step toward the turnstiles, before David blocked him with a solid shoulder. "We gave you everything. We let you live in that luxury condo. You owe us. If you do not turn those accounts back on this exact second, I will hire a lawyer. I will legally seize your grandmother's estate to pay for your insubordination. You know I have the power to do it. I will leave you with absolutely nothing. My grandmother's estate." The threat hung heavy in the air. He was talking about the sprawling historical property my grandmother had owned just outside of Savannah. Reginald had always coveted that land, firmly believing it was his birthright to sell it to commercial real estate developers for a massive profit. He had bullied my grandmother for years about handing over the deed. What he did not know, and what I was certainly not going to tell him over a lobby intercom system, was that my grandmother had legally transferred the deed to my private holding company 2 years before she passed away. She did it precisely to protect the family land from his relentless greed. He had zero legal claim to it, but his arrogance blinded him to the facts. I pressed the intercom button one last time. "David," I said, keeping my voice completely stripped of all emotion, "please escort this man out of the building. If he steps foot on Sterling Wealth Management property ever again, call the Atlanta police immediately and press full charges for trespassing and harassment." "Understood, Ms. Davis," David replied instantly. He and the other guards stepped forward, each taking a very firm grip on one of my father's arms. For a split second, the facade completely shattered. My father looked genuinely horrified. The absolute authority he believed he held over me had vanished into thin air. As the guards physically turned him around and began marching him toward the heavy revolving glass doors, he started shouting again. He made wild, incoherent threats about destroying my career, calling the newspapers, and taking me to Supreme Court. But as the heavy, soundproof glass doors spun, pushing him out onto the busy downtown sidewalk, his voice was completely cut off. The quiet elegance of the lobby returned. The receptionist let out a long, shaky sigh of relief and sat back down at her desk. The executives who had stopped to watch the spectacle slowly went back to their business, murmuring quietly among themselves as they headed toward the elevators. I sat in my office chair watching the live feed of my father standing on the sidewalk outside. He was furiously straightening his designer tie and glaring up at the glass tower. He pointed a threatening finger at the building one last time before storming off toward the parking garage. He was going to call his lawyer. He was going to try to destroy me just like he promised. I reached out and clicked the mouse, closing the security feed. I pulled a thick stack of international investment portfolios toward me and picked up my favorite gold pen. The corporate ambush had failed miserably. The war was escalating exactly as I expected, and I was more than ready for his next move. 2 days after my father made a complete spectacle of himself in my corporate lobby, I attended a high society charity luncheon at the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Atlanta. I was representing my firm dressed in a tailored ivory suit, making connections with other female executives, community leaders, and philanthropists. For the first few hours, my life felt beautifully normal. The ambient hum of polite conversation, the clinking of crystal glasses, the exchange of business cards. It was the world I had built for myself through years of relentless hard work, late nights, and absolute dedication to my craft. It was a space far away from the chaotic, exhausting demands of my family. For the first time in my adult life, I was finally breathing clean air. As the event concluded, I stepped out onto the grand circular driveway to wait for the valet to bring my car. The afternoon sun was warm, casting a golden glow over the manicured hedges of the hotel entrance. I was checking a quick email on my phone when I heard the sharp, aggressive clicking of heels approaching rapidly on the concrete. Kendra. The voice was low, sharp, and unmistakably disappointed. I felt a familiar tension knot in my shoulders, but I forced myself to remain perfectly still. I turned around to see my mother Brenda marching up the driveway. She was dressed in her absolute Sunday best, wearing a wide-brimmed navy hat, a pristine matching suit, and her signature string of pearls. She looked like she had just stepped off the pulpit at our megachurch, ready to deliver a sermon on grace. But her face was set in a tight, ugly mask of righteous indignation. She marched right up to me, completely ignoring social boundaries and invading my personal space. She reached out and grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging deeply into the silk sleeve of my jacket. "How dare you!" she hissed. She kept her voice low to avoid drawing the attention of the wealthy patrons standing nearby, yet her tone was trembling with absolute fury. "How dare you humiliate your father like that in front of your co-workers? Have you completely lost your mind?" I calmly reached down and peeled her fingers off my arm one by one. I smoothed my sleeve with slow, deliberate movements, refusing to break eye contact. "I am at a professional event, Mother. I suggest you lower your voice and step back before I call hotel security." She scoffed, crossing her arms tightly across her chest. "You do not get to dictate how I speak to you. I brought you into this world. You are tearing this entire family apart over a silly, childish joke. A good black woman honors her parents, Kendra. The Lord sees what you are doing, and he is not pleased. You cut off your own sister." Trent had to endure the ultimate embarrassment of walking out of that luxury dealership with absolutely nothing because of your little temper tantrum. Jasmine has been crying herself to sleep for days because her husband is so deeply depressed about his credit being declined. "You need to apologize to Trent, call the bank, and fix this mess today." The sheer audacity of her words was almost impressive. I stood there looking at the woman who had birthed me, truly marveling at her profound delusion. She was standing outside a luxury hotel, actively trying to use respectability politics and religious guilt to force me back into financial submission. She genuinely cared more about her lazy, unemployed son-in-law getting a shiny new Porsche than she cared about her own daughter's dignity. She expected me to bow my head, ask for forgiveness, and turn the money back on simply to save face. It was the classic matriarchal guilt trip she had used on me since I was a teenager. Whenever anyone in the family wronged me, it was always my responsibility to be the bigger person and absorb the damage to keep the family peace. I was always expected to turn the other cheek while they happily slapped it. "Mother," I said, my voice as cold and precise as a scalpel, "you really should not be wasting your energy worrying about Trent and his car lease." She raised her chin in defiance, her eyes narrowing beneath the brim of her church hat. "And why is that? We are a family. We look out for each other. We protect our own." "Because you have much bigger problems to look out for," I replied, taking a step closer so only she could hear the absolute finality in my voice. "You should be worrying about where you are going to live next month." Her confident expression faltered. The righteous anger in her eyes flickered into genuine confusion. "What are you talking about?" I maintained a perfectly neutral expression, feeling a deep sense of peace wash over me as I delivered the reality check she desperately needed. "I stopped paying your mortgage on Monday night," I told her plainly. "That beautiful 5-bedroom house you love showing off to your church friends. The one you tell everyone my father bought with his brilliant business investments. The one where you host your elaborate Sunday dinners just to prove how blessed you are. The bank is going to nail a 30-day foreclosure notice to your mahogany front door by the end of the month." My mother turned completely pale. The rich brown color rapidly drained from her face beneath her expensive foundation. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked like all the air had been violently knocked out of her lungs. "You are lying!" She finally stammered, her voice losing all of its previous authority and shrinking into a panicked whisper. "Your father has a massive investment portfolio. He manages our finances. We do not need your little contributions to keep our house. You are just trying to scare me." I smiled a sad, pitying smile. Mom, I am the portfolio. For 6 years, my corporate bonuses have been the exact funds keeping that house out of the hands of the bank. I have been paying the property taxes. I have been paying the insurance. Your husband is entirely broke. He has been broke for a very long time, and he has been using my money to play pretend. And as of this week, because you both decided I was disposable, the fantasy is over. My mother gasped loudly. She clutched her pearls with both hands, her eyes darting around wildly to see if anyone in the affluent crowd was listening to our conversation. The terrifying reality of her impending poverty was crashing down on her all at once. Then she did what she always did, when backed into a corner where she could not win with logic. She played the ultimate victim. She let out a dramatic, breathless cry, her knees buckling as she faked a sudden fainting spell. She collapsed against a heavy marble pillar near the hotel entrance, sliding down gracefully enough to ensure she did not wrinkle her designer skirt or damage her expensive hat. Several guests turned to look in shock. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The valet rushed over, looking panicked. "Ma'am, do you need a doctor?" he asked, reaching out to help her sit up straight. I reached into my purse and handed the valet a crisp, $50 bill. "She is just dehydrated and feeling a little overwhelmed by the heat," I said smoothly, my voice projecting absolute calm authority over the situation. "Get her a glass of ice water, and call her a taxi, please. Make sure she gets home safely." My luxury sedan pulled up to the curb at that exact moment. I slipped into the driver's seat and closed the door. Through the tinted window, I looked back one last time. I left my mother sitting on the concrete, leaning against the marble pillar. She opened one eye to watch me leave, completely exposed to the judgment and whispers of the very high society crowd she had spent her entire life trying to impress. As I drove away from the hotel, merging into the afternoon traffic, I felt no guilt whatsoever. The church crown had finally slipped, and the truth was about to crush them all. The following Tuesday morning, the official declaration of war arrived right on schedule. I was sitting at a quiet corner table of my favorite artisan coffee shop in Midtown Atlanta, enjoying a rare hour of downtime before my first client meeting of the day. The morning sun was streaming through the large glass windows, and I was quietly sipping a vanilla latte while reviewing a quarterly market report on my tablet. "Excuse me, are you Kendra Davis?" a voice asked. I looked up. A man in a plain gray polo shirt and khaki pants was standing next to my table. He held a thick manila envelope in his right hand. He did not look like a businessman, and he certainly did not look like a barista. I knew exactly what this was. "Yes, I am Kendra," I replied evenly. The man dropped the heavy envelope directly onto my table right next to my coffee cup. "You have been served," he said in a flat, rehearsed tone before turning around and walking right out the front door of the cafe. I did not flinch. I did not drop my coffee cup or look around in embarrassment. I simply picked up the envelope, slid my manicured finger under the flap, and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. I adjusted my posture, crossed my legs, and began to read. The front page was incredibly revealing. My father had not filed the lawsuit himself. The plaintiffs listed at the top of the document were my sister Jasmine and her husband Trent. My father was clearly using them as the face of the legal battle to keep his own hands clean, probably because his financial advisor had warned him that his name was nowhere on my actual accounts. The claims listed in the lawsuit were spectacular in their sheer unadulterated delusion. Trent and Jasmine were suing me for gross financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and the malicious withholding of a generational family trust fund. They were claiming that I had illegally hijacked the family wealth, causing them severe emotional distress and extreme financial hardship. Trent had even included a deeply comical section claiming that my actions had directly damaged his professional reputation as a freelance consultant because he was unable to secure a vehicle necessary for his business. He was literally suing me because I stopped paying for his luxury car lease. I finished reading the first 5 pages, placed the documents neatly back into the envelope, and finished my latte. I felt a profound sense of secondhand embarrassment for whoever they had hired to draft this garbage. An hour later, I was sitting in the corner office of one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in the state of Georgia. The office belonged to Valerie, my best friend, and my personal attorney. The room smelled of expensive leather-fresh lilies and absolute power. Valerie was sitting behind her massive glass desk, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, meticulously flipping through the lawsuit I had just handed her. She let out a sharp, incredulous laugh, tossing the papers back onto the glass surface. "Kendra," she said, leaning back in her chair and shaking her head, "please tell me they did not pay actual money to have a licensed attorney file this absolute fiction." I smiled, sinking deeper into the plush guest chair. "My father threatened to destroy me," I said. "I suppose this is his grand strategy." Valerie picked up her silver pen and tapped it against the documents. "This is not a legal strategy, Kendra. This is a suicide mission. The lawyer Trent hired operates out of a strip mall in the suburbs. He clearly did no discovery, no background checks, and no financial auditing before filing this paperwork. If he had, he would have realized within 5 minutes that the generational family trust they are suing you for does not even exist. That was the grand secret my father had been hiding from his precious son-in-law. Reginald had spent years painting a masterpiece of lies to convince Trent that he was marrying into a massively wealthy Atlanta family. Reginald had promised Trent that Jasmine had a massive trust fund waiting in the wings managed by her older sister who worked in finance. Trent, driven entirely by greed and his own laziness, had eagerly married my sister, fully expecting a massive payout. The reality was that the trust fund they were referring to was simply my personal, limited liability company. It was the corporate entity I used to hold my personal real estate investments, my stock portfolios, and my own hard-earned wealth. They were literally trying to sue me for my own paychecks. "We are going to request an immediate deposition," Valerie said, a dangerous, predatory smile spreading across her face. "I am not going to file a motion to dismiss this case. That would be entirely too easy for them. I want to get Trent and his strip mall lawyer in a conference room. I want them to go on the official legal record, claiming ownership of your assets before I drop the hammer on them." "I agree," I replied, matching her smile. "But why is Trent pushing this so hard and so fast?" "Jasmine. I understand she is incredibly spoiled, but Trent is practically foaming at the mouth for this money. If he is just a lazy husband wanting a free ride, his reaction is entirely too desperate." Valerie stopped tapping her pen. Her expression shifted from amused to deadly serious. She opened the top drawer of her desk and pulled out a sleek blue folder, sliding it across the glass toward me. "That is exactly what I thought," Valerie said softly. "While we were waiting for them to officially file the paperwork, I hired a private forensic accountant to do a little digging into Trent. I wanted to establish a clear paper trail showing exactly how much of his lifestyle was funded by your bank accounts. I wanted to prove his complete financial reliance on you to embarrass his lawyer. But what my investigator found was significantly worse." I opened the blue folder. Inside were dozens of printed bank statements, wire transfer receipts, and heavily redacted digital communication logs. I scanned the first page, my eyes widening slightly as I processed the numbers. "Trent is drowning," Kendra, Valerie explained, leaning forward and resting her elbows on the desk. "You know those large monthly cash transfers you were sending to Jasmine's checking account? The ones designated for her household expenses, groceries, and property maintenance?" "Yes," I said, flipping to the next page. "It was around $8,000 a month." "Trent was intercepting almost all of it," Valerie said bluntly. "He was not spending it on Jasmine or the house. He has been funneling that money into a massive, highly illegal offshore sports betting syndicate. Trent is a chronic gambler, Kendra, and he is not a very good one." I stared at the wire transfers. Hundreds of transactions moving from Jasmine's local bank directly to shell corporations in the Caribbean. The picture became perfectly, terrifyingly clear. Trent was not just upset that his luxury lifestyle had been paused. He was panicked because he owed a massive amount of money to very dangerous people, and I had just turned off his only supply of cash. "He was using my sister's allowance to cover his losses," I said, a cold realization settling over me. "Exactly," Valerie confirmed. "He is currently over $200,000 in debt." When you froze the accounts on Monday night, you did not just stop him from leasing a Porsche. You stopped him from making his minimum weekly payments to his bookies. He is desperate. He convinced your father and your sister to file this lawsuit because he genuinely believed he could intimidate you into a quick cash settlement to save his own life. I closed the blue folder, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. Jasmine had absolutely no idea who she was married to. She thought Trent was a sophisticated business consultant going through a temporary dry spell. She had no idea he was systematically draining her accounts and jeopardizing her safety. And instead of questioning her husband's sudden panic, she had turned all of her venom and hatred toward me. "So what is our play?" I asked, looking up at Valerie. Valerie steepled her fingers together. "We let the deposition proceed exactly as planned. We will let Trent sit across the table and build an entire castle of lies on the legal record. We will let him testify about his phantom trust fund, his supposed wealth, and his pristine character. We will let him dig his own grave as deep as he possibly can, and then we will bury him in it." I stood up from the chair, smoothing my trousers, feeling a profound surge of adrenaline. My family had demanded a war. They had chosen to align themselves with a parasite simply because he stroked their egos while treating the daughter who actually protected them like absolute garbage. "Schedule the deposition for Friday," I told Valerie as I walked toward the office door. "Let us give Trent the exact attention he is asking for." Friday morning arrived with a heavy downpour of rain washing over the Atlanta skyline, but inside the glass walls of Valerie's executive conference room, the climate was perfectly controlled and ice cold. The long mahogany table was polished to a mirror finish. A certified court reporter sat quietly in the corner setting up her stenography machine. Valerie and I sat on one side of the table, two black women in immaculate tailored suits, sipping sparkling water and waiting with absolute patience. Trent and Jasmine arrived 20 minutes late. It was a classic transparent attempt at a power play meant to show us that they were in control of the schedule. Instead, they just looked incredibly unprofessional and thoroughly soaked. Trent walked into the room radiating a bizarre, unearned confidence. He was wearing an ill-fitting gray suit that looked like it had been pulled off the clearance rack of a discount department store. It was a stark contrast to the designer casual wear he usually sported when my credit cards were footing the bill. Jasmine trailed closely behind him, clutching a $15,000 Hermes handbag that I had purchased for her 30th birthday. She glared at me from across the room, her eyes narrowed in a look of pure concentrated hatred. She was playing the role of the ultimate victim, a princess wrongfully locked out of her castle. They were accompanied by their legal counsel, a man introduced as Mr. Higgins. One look at Higgins and Valerie subtly tapped my foot under the table. He was a disheveled, sweating man carrying a battered leather briefcase that looked like it was about to burst at the seams. He looked exactly like the kind of lawyer who spent his days fighting minor traffic citations and strip mall slip and fall cases. He was completely out of his depth in a corporate law firm that handled billion-dollar mergers. "Let us get this over with," Trent said, pulling out a heavy leather chair and aggressively dropping himself into it. "I have a very busy afternoon." I looked at him, my expression perfectly blank. I knew for a fact that his only appointment that afternoon was checking the odds on a college football game he desperately needed to win. The court reporter swore Trent in. Mr. Higgins fumbled with his paperwork, dropping a pen on the floor before clearing his throat to begin his opening statement. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project a sense of legal authority. "We are here today to discuss the gross mismanagement and illegal withholding of the Davis Family Trust." Higgins began reading from a poorly typed document. "My clients, Trent and Jasmine, have been subjected to severe financial abuse. Ms. Davis has maliciously locked them out of accounts they are legally entitled to, causing severe emotional distress and damaging my client's professional consulting business. We are prepared to file for maximum damages unless these accounts are surrendered immediately." Valerie did not blink. She did not interrupt. She simply let him read his poorly constructed fantasy into the official legal record. Trent, entirely unable to let his lawyer do the talking, leaned forward and rested his elbows on the mahogany table. He looked at me with a sickeningly condescending smile. He was a man who possessed absolutely zero financial literacy, yet he was about to try and mansplain wealth management to a senior portfolio director. "Look," Kendra, Trent said, using a tone reserved for speaking to a slow child. "I know you are single and you spend all your time at the office, so maybe you do not understand how a family unit actually operates. When your father promised me a payout upon marrying Jasmine, he established a fiduciary duty. Generational wealth is meant to be shared with the head of the household to build a legacy. You cannot just throw a temper tantrum and lock up money that rightfully belongs to my wife, and by extension, me." Jasmine nodded enthusiastically in agreement, reaching out to rub Trent's arm in a show of solidarity. "You are being incredibly selfish, Kendra," she snapped. "You are trying to ruin my marriage just because you are jealous that I have a husband and you have nothing but a laptop. Just give us the account keys and we will drop the lawsuit." I sat there in the quiet conference room, listening to the rhythmic tapping of the court reporter's keys, documenting every single word. I marveled at the sheer magnitude of my father's lies. Reginald had so thoroughly convinced this lazy, arrogant man that our family possessed generational wealth, that Trent was now sitting in a legal deposition, aggressively demanding access to an inheritance that only existed in my father's desperate imagination. And beyond the lies, Trent was using this fake trust as a shield to hide his massive, crippling gambling debts from his wife. He thought he was the smartest person in the room. He thought his white privilege and his loud voice would simply bulldoze over two black women in a corporate setting. I looked at Valerie and gave her a nearly imperceptible nod. The trap was fully set. Trent had just testified on the record that he was entitled to the accounts, and Higgins had officially demanded the financial keys. Valerie slowly uncrossed her legs. She did not raise her voice. She did not match their frantic, aggressive energy. She simply reached down and clicked open the brass locks of her pristine leather briefcase. "Before my client responds to these truly fascinating demands," Valerie said, her voice smooth and lethally calm, "I have a few clarifying questions regarding the financial damages your client claims to have suffered." Higgins frowned, looking confused. "The damages are clear. They cannot access their money." Valerie pulled out the thick blue folder she had shown me earlier in her office. She placed it on the glass table and slid it precisely across the polished surface. It stopped exactly halfway between Higgins and Trent. "Mr. Higgins," Valerie continued, maintaining unbroken eye contact with the sweating lawyer, "I strongly suggest you open that folder and turn to page 4 before you allow your client to commit perjury on the official record." Trent scoffed, leaning back in his chair with a dismissive wave of his hand. "What is this? More fake bank statements. You cannot scare me with paperwork." Higgins hesitantly opened the blue folder. He flipped past the cover sheet and landed on page 4. The room went completely silent, save for the sound of the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. I watched the color rapidly drain from the lawyer's face. His eyes darted frantically across the columns of numbers, wire transfer routing codes, and offshore banking receipts. Counselor Valerie said softly, leaning forward, "Your client is suing my client for a trust fund that does not legally exist. The accounts in question are registered under a private limited liability company solely owned by Kendra Davis. But that is not the most interesting part of this deposition." Jasmine frowned, looking back and forth between Valerie and the lawyer. What is she talking about, Trent? What is in the folder? Valerie did not let Trent answer. Page 4 details a series of wire transfers spanning the last 36 months. Valerie explained, her voice ringing clear and sharp in the quiet room. "It appears that the $8,000 monthly allowance my client generously provided to her sister for household expenses was never used for the household. Instead, your husband Trent has been systematically intercepting those funds and wiring them to an illegal offshore sports betting syndicate based in the Caribbean." Trent froze. His smug smile completely vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. He stared at the blue folder like it was a live explosive. Jasmine let out a sharp gasp. She turned to her husband, her eyes wide with confusion. "Trent," she whispered, What is she saying? Is this true? Furthermore, Valerie continued turning the knife with absolute legal precision. The forensic accounting report in that folder proves that Trent currently owes $214,000 to these bookies. He did not file this lawsuit because he was worried about a family legacy. He filed this lawsuit because my client turned off the money tap, and his creditors are actively looking for him. The silence that followed Valerie's statement was absolute and suffocating. The only sound in the conference room was the rhythmic, relentless rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Mr. Higgins, the cheap lawyer Trent had hired, stared at the offshore wire transfer receipts spread across the mahogany table as if they were venomous snakes. He was a low-rent attorney who spent his days chasing ambulances, but he was not completely stupid. He knew that pushing a lawsuit to claim a non-existent trust fund while his client was actively hiding massive gambling debts was a fast track to disbarment. Higgins aggressively closed his battered leather briefcase, the metal clasps snapping shut with a sharp, violent echo. "This deposition is over," he announced, his voice cracking slightly as he scrambled to gather his remaining files. He stood up, refusing to even look at Trent. "As of this exact moment, I am officially withdrawing as your legal counsel. I strongly advise you to find criminal representation because you have lied to me and you have attempted to use my firm to commit federal fraud." Higgins did not wait for a response. He practically sprinted out of the conference room, leaving the heavy glass door swinging in his wake. Trent sat frozen in his chair. The arrogant, condescending man who had marched into the room 10 minutes ago, eager to mansplain generational wealth to me, was completely gone. He was sweating profusely, his pale skin glistening under the harsh fluorescent lights. He opened his mouth desperately, trying to formulate a lie, but his brain had completely short-circuited. He looked at Jasmine, his eyes pleading for a lifeline that he absolutely did not deserve. Jasmine was staring intently at the blue folder. Her perfectly manicured hands were trembling. I watched her face closely, expecting the inevitable realization to wash over her. I expected her to scream at Trent. I expected her to demand answers about how he could steal her money and put their lives in immediate danger with illegal bookies. But I had severely underestimated the depth of my sister's conditioning. Jasmine had spent her entire life being the golden child. She was constantly protected from consequence, endlessly coddled by our parents, and taught from a very young age that I was the root of all her problems. Her mind simply could not process the terrifying fact that her perfect white husband was a parasitic fraud who had gambled away their security. The cognitive dissonance was too great, so her brain violently rejected reality. Jasmine stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. She grabbed her crystal glass of ice water and hurled the contents directly across the table. The freezing water splashed across the front of my tailored suit, dripping heavily down my silk blouse. I did not flinch. I did not raise my hands to protect myself. I simply sat there, blinking away the cold droplets from my eyelashes, watching my sister completely unravel. "You forged these!" Jasmine screamed, her voice shrill and echoing piercingly off the walls. She pointed a violently shaking finger at my face. "You manufactured these fake bank statements because you are a miserable, bitter spinster. You are so fiercely jealous of my perfect marriage and my happiness that you would actually create fraudulent documents just to ruin my life." Trent, sensing an unexpected escape route, immediately latched onto her delusion. "She is right," he stammered, nodding frantically and wiping the sweat from his forehead. "I have never seen those documents in my life, Jasmine. Kendra is trying to frame me. She is trying to make me look like a criminal so she can keep all the family money for herself." Valerie stood up slowly, her expression radiating absolute lethal menace. "Let me make this perfectly clear to both of you," Valerie said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "I am an officer of the court. Those documents were obtained by a licensed forensic accountant directly from the financial institutions your husband used to wire the money. They are certified and legally binding, and if you ever throw a glass of water at my client again, I will have you arrested for assault before you can even reach the lobby downstairs." Jasmine ignored Valerie completely, Her eyes were locked onto mine, burning with a frantic, unhinged hatred. She was terrified of the poverty staring her in the face, but she was channeling all of that terror into pure rage directed squarely at me. "You think you have won, Kendra?" she spat, grabbing her expensive designer handbag and slinging it over her shoulder. "You think you can just cut us off and embarrass my husband with your little corporate tricks? But you are forgetting who our father is. You are forgetting what happens this weekend. The gala." My father's grand 40th anniversary business gala was scheduled for Saturday night at the most exclusive country club in Atlanta. It was supposed to be a massive, lavish celebration of his fake legacy, attended by our entire church congregation, local politicians, and everyone who mattered in our social circle. "Dad is going to tell everyone the absolute truth," Jasmine threatened, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "He is going to stand on that stage and expose you to the entire city. He is going to announce that you are a greedy thief who stole from her own family. You will never be able to show your face in Atlanta society again. We are going to destroy your reputation permanently." She grabbed Trent firmly by the arm, hauling him out of his chair. "We are leaving," she declared. Trent stumbled after her like an obedient, terrified dog. He cast one last panicked glance at the blue folder on the table before disappearing through the doorway, eager to escape the reality of his own actions. The room fell completely silent again, save for the soft, rapid tapping of the court reporter who had diligently recorded every single psychotic word of my sister's outburst for the official legal record. I picked up a white linen napkin from the center of the table and calmly dabbed the ice water off my silk blouse. I looked over at Valerie, who was shaking her head in sheer disbelief at the astonishing level of delusion we had just witnessed. "Well," Valerie said, sitting back down and resting her hands flat on the table, "I have handled messy corporate divorces, hostile business takeovers, and federal indictments, but I have never in my entire career seen a woman actively defend the man who just gambled away her financial security." "She needs an enemy, Valerie," I explained softly, tossing the damp napkin aside. "If she admits that Trent is a fraud, she has to admit that her entire life is a lie. She has to admit that I was the one paying for her designer clothes, her luxury cars, and her perfect image. Her fragile ego literally cannot survive that reality, so I have to be the villain. It is the only way she can cope." Valerie leaned forward, a sharp, calculating glint in her dark eyes. "So what about this gala on Saturday? Your father is actually delusional enough to try and publicly shame you in front of the entire city. They are cornered animals, Kendra. They have no money and no power, which means they are going to use that stage to launch a massive, highly public smear campaign against you." I smiled, feeling a profound sense of anticipation settling deep in my chest. Let them try. My father loves putting on a grand show. He thrives on having an audience. But he is severely underestimating the fact that I am the one who holds all the receipts. I reached out and placed my hand firmly on the thick blue folder. "Cancel my Friday afternoon appointments, Valerie. I need to go shopping. If my family wants to make me the center of attention at the biggest social event of the year, corporate law firm, to the most exclusive designer boutique in Buckhead. If my father was planning a public execution of my character in front of the entire Atlanta elite, I was going to attend the event looking absolutely spectacular." I walked through the heavy glass doors of the boutique, and the manager immediately greeted me by name. I bypassed the seasonal racks and asked to see their private collection. 30 minutes later, I was standing in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror wearing an $8,000 emerald green silk gown. It draped perfectly over my frame, the rich color complementing my dark skin. It did not look like a dress meant for a woman hiding in shame. It looked like liquid armor. I handed the manager my metal card without a second thought. As I was waiting for my receipt, my new cell phone began to vibrate violently in my purse. I pulled it out and saw a flood of incoming text messages from numbers I had not saved in my new contacts, but the names attached to the furious messages were painfully familiar. Jasmine and my father had wasted absolutely no time spinning their narrative to the extended family. The first message was from my Aunt Beatrice, my mother's older sister, who was notorious for inserting herself into everyone else's business. How could you steal from your own father, the text read. After everything Reginald and Brenda sacrificed to put you through school, you repay them by freezing their hard-earned money. You are a disgrace to this family. Do not even think about showing your face at the gala. The next text was from my cousin Jamal. Wow, Kendra. Jasmine is crying hysterically because you tried to frame Trent with fake bank documents. You are completely sick in the head. You are permanently banned from the country club this weekend. Consider yourself dead to us. I stood in the softly lit boutique reading message after message. My father had executed a masterclass in manipulation. He had preemptively struck painting himself as the hard-working patriarch whose greedy spinster daughter had somehow legally hijacked his wealth. He knew that in our community, the word of the elder was rarely questioned. He knew they would rally around him and cast me out without ever asking for my side of the story. They were the perfect flying monkeys blindly doing his bidding to protect the precious family image. I deleted the text messages, locked my phone, and smiled. Let them believe the lie for 2 more days. The truth was going to be significantly more entertaining. I opened my email application and drafted a quick, highly confidential message to Lydia. Lydia was the senior event coordinator for the Oak Ridge Country Club, where the gala was being held. More importantly, Lydia was a loyal client of my wealth management firm. I had successfully doubled her personal investment portfolio over the last 3 years. Lydia, I typed, I need a massive personal favor for Saturday night. I need VIP access to the audiovisual booth overlooking the main ballroom, and I need the technicians to grant me wireless pairing access to the primary projection screens. Keep my name off the official guest list, Lydia replied less than 2 minutes later. Done. The AV team works for me. See you Saturday, Kendra. The next 48 hours moved quickly. I spent Friday evening meticulously organizing the digital files I needed for my presentation. I redacted sensitive account numbers, but left the dates, the names, and the final dollar amounts perfectly visible. I compiled the foreclosure notices, the offshore wire transfers, and the true property deed to the family estate. I loaded everything onto my tablet, ensuring the slideshow transitions were smooth and instantaneous. Saturday evening arrived, bringing with it a cool, crisp breeze. I pulled my luxury sedan up to the valet stand at the Oak Ridge Country Club. The building was a massive, sprawling colonial structure surrounded by perfectly manicured golf courses. The circular driveway was packed with luxury vehicles, and guests in tuxedos and evening gowns were pouring through the grand entrance. I bypassed the main registration table, slipping through a side door that Lydia had specifically left unlocked for me. I navigated the carpeted back hallways, completely unseen by my family, and made my way up a narrow staircase to the audio-visual booth. The booth was a dark enclosed room suspended above the main ballroom, featuring a wide glass window that provided a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire event. The lead technician, a young guy wearing a black headset, gave me a quick nod and handed me an HDMI pairing code for my tablet. I connected my device, verified that I had full control over the 2 massive projection screens flanking the main stage, and stepped up to the glass window to watch the show. The ballroom was absolutely breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light over 50 round tables draped in white linen. Towering floral centerpieces of white roses and hydrangeas sat at the center of each table. The room was packed with over 300 people. I saw our entire church congregation, the deacons, several local politicians, and the wealthiest members of Atlanta's Black high society. At the front of the room, sitting at a massive head table elevated on a raised platform, was my family. My mother Brenda was wearing a sparkling silver gown, waving to guests, and completely absorbing the attention like royalty. Jasmine was seated next to her, wearing a designer dress that I had indirectly paid for, holding a glass of champagne. Trent was sitting rigidly beside Jasmine, his face slightly pale, his eyes constantly darting toward the exits. He knew his time was running out, but he was forced to play the part of the loving, wealthy husband for the cameras. And then there was my father. Reginald was wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo, working the room with a wide, artificial smile. He was in his absolute element, shaking hands, patting people on the back, and accepting congratulations for a 40-year business legacy that was built entirely on smoke and mirrors. At exactly 8 o'clock, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight hit the main stage. The gentle hum of conversation faded into silence as my father walked proudly up the wooden steps and took his place behind the crystal podium. He adjusted the microphone, looking out over the sea of faces with a look of supreme arrogance. "Thank you all for being here tonight," my father began, his deep voice echoing powerfully through the state-of-the-art sound system. 40 years ago, I started with nothing but a dream and a relentless work ethic. I built an empire from the ground up to ensure that my family name would command respect in this great city. The crowd broke into polite, admiring applause. I stood in the dark AV booth, my finger hovering just inches above the screen of my tablet. I look at my beautiful wife, Brenda. My father continued, gesturing grandly toward the head table. I look at my youngest daughter, Jasmine, who embodies the grace and elegance of our family line. And I look at Trent, the son I never had, who is carrying on our legacy of excellence. These are the people who make the late nights and the endless sacrifices worthwhile. He paused dramatically, lowering his head for a moment to feign deep emotional pain. The ballroom fell completely silent, captivated by his performance. However, my father said, his tone shifting from celebratory to deeply sorrowful. "True leadership requires making difficult, heartbreaking decisions to protect the family estate. Many of you have asked where my eldest daughter Kendra is tonight." A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. Aunt Beatrice shook her head in visible disgust from her seat in the front row. "It breaks my heart to say this publicly," Reginald announced, gripping the edges of the podium tightly. "But Kendra has lost her way. She has allowed greed and jealousy to poison her heart. She recently attempted to manipulate our family finances and steal the very inheritance I built for her sister. Because of her unforgivable actions, I have made the agonizing decision to officially disinherit her. As of tonight, Kendra is entirely cut off from the Davis family estate." Gasps echoed across the ballroom. My mother wiped a fake tear from her eye. Jasmine looked down at her lap, playing the role of the devastated sister perfectly. I did not feel angry. I felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. My father had just dug his grave on a brightly lit stage in front of 300 witnesses. I turned to the AV technician. "Turn on the floor microphone at table 12, I said calmly. I picked up my tablet, pushed open the door of the booth, and began my descent down the staircase. It was time to introduce the city of Atlanta to the real Reginald Davis. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom swung open quietly. I stepped out of the shadows and into the warm, golden glow of the crystal chandeliers. The murmurs of the 300 guests were thick and heavy, echoing off the high ceilings as they eagerly digested my father's grand declaration of my disinheritance. I walked with deliberate, measured steps down the center aisle. My emerald green silk gown flowed effortlessly behind me, catching the light with every movement. I did not look like a woman who had just been cast out of her family. I looked like a woman who owned the building. My mother spotted me first. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers, and her jaw dropped in absolute unmasked horror. She frantically nudged my father, who was still standing behind the crystal podium, soaking in the sympathetic gazes of his audience. Reginald looked up, his fake, benevolent smile instantly freezing into a tight grimace of panic. I reached table 12, which was situated perfectly in the center of the room. I picked up the silver floor microphone resting on the stand. I did not rush. I took a slow, deep breath and looked directly at the man who had spent my entire life treating me like a disposable asset. "Dad," I said, my voice perfectly level. The state-of-the-art sound system amplified my words, cutting through the whispers and plunging the entire massive ballroom into a sudden, suffocating silence. It is incredibly hard to disinherit someone from an estate that you do not actually own. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I saw Aunt Beatrice clutch her chest in the front row. The deacons from our church exchanged confused, alarmed glances. Reginald gripped the edges of the podium so tightly his knuckles turned white. His face flushed a deep, furious crimson. He quickly leaned into his own microphone, attempting to laugh off my statement with his booming, authoritative voice. "I apologize to all of our esteemed guests," my father announced, forcing a deep chuckle. "As I mentioned, my daughter is deeply troubled and unwell. Security, please escort Kendra out of the building so she can get the help she desperately needs." Two large security guards in black suits immediately stepped forward from the perimeter of the room. But before they could even reach my aisle, Lydia, the senior event coordinator, stepped out from the side curtains. She caught the eye of the head guard and gave a sharp, definitive shake of her head. The guards immediately stopped, folded their hands behind their backs, and retreated into the shadows. I was a premium investor in this country club. They were not going to touch me. My father looked at the guards, then back at me, genuine fear finally breaking through his arrogant facade. I tapped the screen of my tablet. Instantly, the two massive projection screens flanking the main stage flickered. The towering 10-foot-tall vanity portraits of my father vanished. In their place, a high-definition, heavily redacted but crystal-clear legal document appeared. It was a property deed. "Let us talk about this incredible legacy you built," I said, pacing slowly in front of table 12, "the one you just claimed to be protecting from my greed. Everyone in this room has been to the Davis family estate. You have all attended my mother's lavish Sunday dinners and holiday parties. It is a beautiful 5-bedroom home. But I want you all to look closely at the screen behind my father. Look at the name of the legal owner." 300 pairs of eyes shifted from me to the massive screens. The silence in the room was so profound, you could hear the ice melting in the water glasses. "That house does not belong to Reginald Davis," I continued, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "It belongs to Zenith Holdings, a private limited liability company of which I am the sole proprietor. 5 years ago, my father defaulted on his mortgage. The bank was 30 days away from seizing the property and throwing my parents onto the street. I bought the house out of foreclosure to save them from public humiliation. My father is not a self-made real estate mogul. He is my tenant, and he has not paid his rent in 6 years." My mother buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently, as the carefully constructed illusion of her high society life shattered into a million pieces. The church members sitting near the front row began to whisper furiously. Reginald was completely speechless. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but no sound came out. The microphone picked up his heavy, panicked breathing. "But it does not stop there," I said, tapping my tablet again. The screens transitioned to a new set of documents. These were the corporate lease agreements for the luxury vehicles my parents drove to church every Sunday to show off their supposed wealth. Next to those were the credit card statements that funded my mother's designer wardrobe and my father's country club membership. Every single luxury this family enjoys has been funded directly by my corporate paychecks. I explained to the crowd, making eye contact with the relatives who had sent me hateful text messages just hours earlier. I sacrificed my own peace, my own savings, and my own youth to maintain my father's fragile ego. And in return, he stood on this stage tonight and attempted to destroy my reputation, because I finally decided to stop paying for his lies. I turned my attention to the head table, locking eyes with Jasmine. She was sitting rigidly in her chair, her face completely drained of color. Trent was practically vibrating with terror beside her. "And then there is Trent," I said, tapping my tablet for the final time. The screens shifted to the offshore wire transfer receipts that Valerie had secured. The son my father never had. The man who tried to sue me on Friday for a trust fund that does not exist. Trent has spent the last 3 years intercepting the household allowance I provided for my sister. He did not invest it in a consulting business. He wired over $200,000 to illegal sports betting syndicates in the Caribbean. The ballroom erupted. People were literally standing up from their seats. The sheer magnitude of the scandal was too much for the polite society crowd to process quietly. Jasmine let out a piercing, hysterical sob, finally unable to deny the truth, when it was projected 10 feet tall in front of her entire social circle. She turned and began hitting Trent in the chest, screaming at him through her tears. Trent did not try to calm her down. He did not try to defend his honor. He aggressively pushed Jasmine's hands away, stood up from the head table, and practically ran toward the side exit of the ballroom. He abandoned his wife, his massive debts, and his fake family, without a single backward glance, disappearing into the night. I looked back at my father. He was gripping the podium, staring out at the room with hollow, defeated eyes. He had spent 40 years building a kingdom made entirely of sand, and I had just summoned the hurricane. I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I walked calmly up the wooden steps of the stage. The crowd watched my every move in breathless fascination. I stopped right in front of my father. He looked incredibly small, stripped of his booming voice and his tailored arrogance. "Since you wanted to talk about my inheritance in front of all these people," I said softly, handing the envelope directly to him. "Here is your 30-day eviction notice. You are officially, legally removed from my property. You have exactly 1 month to pack your things and vacate the premises." I turned away from him, walked back down the stairs, and handed the microphone to Lydia. I did not stay to watch them cry. I did not wait for apologies that I knew would never come. I walked straight down the center aisle, my head held high, leaving the ruins of the Davis family legacy burning brightly behind me. The cool night air hit my face as I pushed through the heavy brass doors of the Oak Ridge Country Club. The valet already had my car running and waiting at the curb, exactly as I had arranged. Standing next to the passenger door was Valerie. She was leaning casually against the sleek black exterior of my luxury sedan, holding 2 crystal glasses and a bottle of vintage champagne. I watched the whole thing from the security monitor in the lobby. Valerie set her smile bright and triumphant under the ambient lights of the circular driveway. "You did not just burn the bridge, Kendra, you vaporized it." I took the glass she offered and took a long, satisfying sip. They asked for a show. I simply provided the script. Before we could get into the car, the heavy doors of the country club violently swung open again. It was Jasmine. She was sprinting down the manicured concrete path, her expensive designer heels clicking frantically against the pavement. Her makeup was completely ruined, with dark streaks of mascara running down her cheeks. The arrogant, hateful sister who had thrown a glass of water at my face just days prior was completely gone. In her place was a terrified woman who had just watched her entire fake reality collapse in front of her social circle. "Kendra, wait!" she screamed, her voice cracking in the quiet night. She ran up to my car, practically throwing herself against the driver's side door. "You cannot leave. Trent is gone. He took the keys to our rental car, and he left me there. You have to help me. I have no money to get home." I looked at her through the open window. For my entire life, I had been her designated savior. Whenever Jasmine broke a toy, failed a class, or overdrawn her bank account, I was the one expected to step in and fix it so she would not suffer any consequences. But looking at her now, I felt absolutely nothing. The deep well of my empathy had run completely dry. "You have a cell phone, Jasmine," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Call a taxi. Call one of your friends who just watched you get exposed. Or better yet, go back inside and ask Dad for some of that generational wealth he was just bragging about on stage. Please," she sobbed, grabbing the edge of the open window with trembling hands. "I am so sorry. I did not know about Trent and his gambling debts. I did not know about the foreclosure on the house. You have to believe me. I believe that you only care about the truth now because you are the one finally paying the price for the lie," I replied smoothly. "Have a good night, Jasmine." I pressed the button to roll up the window. She stepped back, her hands falling to her sides in total defeat. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. As we merged onto the main road, leaving the country club behind us, my cell phone buzzed in the center console. It was a text message from my father. It contained a single word: "Please." I picked up the phone, blocked his number permanently, and tossed the device into the back seat. The fallout over the next month was swift, brutal, and entirely of their own making. My father attempted to fight the eviction notice. He hired another cheap lawyer to claim tenant rights, but Valerie crushed them in a single morning at the county courthouse. The judge was completely unamused by a man trying to claim squatter rights on a multi-million-dollar estate owned by the daughter he had just publicly disinherited. 3 weeks later, I sat in my car parked at the end of my old street, watching a discount moving company load my parents' belongings into a small rented truck. They were downsizing to a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the far outskirts of the city. Their country club memberships were instantly revoked due to unpaid dues. Our church congregation, deeply embarrassed by the massive public scandal, quietly asked both of my parents to step down from their leadership committees. Jasmine faced a reality that was even worse. Trent filed for divorce the very next morning. He was eager to separate himself from a family that no longer had any money to steal, leaving her to deal with the fallout of his actions. Left with massive credit card debt and absolutely zero income, Jasmine was forced to file for bankruptcy and move into the tiny guest bedroom of my parents' new apartment. The golden child and the proud patriarch were finally living the reality they had earned. I sold the family estate to a commercial real estate developer the following week. The sale injected millions of dollars of pure profit back into my personal investment portfolio. I was completely untethered from their toxic history. 6 months later, the chaos of that week was nothing but a distant memory. I was hosting a Sunday dinner, but this one looked vastly different from the tense, miserable gatherings my mother used to orchestrate. I was standing on the expansive terrace of my downtown penthouse, the Atlanta city skyline glowing beautifully against the twilight. The long wooden dining table was filled with people who actually loved and respected me. Valerie was pouring wine, laughing loudly at a joke. My closest friends, my mentors, and my colleagues had all gathered together. We were sharing plates of incredible food, telling stories, and lifting each other up. There was no screaming, no walking on eggshells, and absolutely no one demanding a piece of my soul to inflate their own ego. I leaned against the glass railing, looking out over the city lights. My father had stood in front of a crowded restaurant on my 35th birthday and confidently declared that he should have stopped at one kid. Looking back, I realized he was absolutely right. He should have stopped at one kid, because the one he threw away, the one he treated like a bank and a burden, was the only one capable of building an empire. Sometimes the best way to honor your ancestors is not by blindly serving the people who share your blood. It is by becoming the generation that finally cuts the dead weight and builds a legacy of authentic peace. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic family members to save your own life, I want you to know that the peace on the other side is worth every single tear. Thank you for listening to my story. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe in protecting your peace at all costs. Let me know in the comments how you found the strength to set your own boundaries. Remember, you are never obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm. Saturday evening arrived with a crisp autumn chill that felt perfectly suited for the cold reality I was about to deliver. I pulled my car up to the valet stand at the Oak Ridge Country Club, one of the most exclusive venues in the entire state. The sprawling colonial architecture was illuminated by warm floodlights, and the circular driveway was already packed with a parade of luxury vehicles. Men in custom tuxedos and women in shimmering evening gowns were pouring through the grand double doors, completely unaware that they had purchased tickets to a spectacular demolition. I did not walk through the front entrance. I had no intention of dealing with the fake pleasantries of my aunts and cousins who had spent the last 3 days blowing up my phone with hateful messages. Instead, I followed the exact instructions Lydia had texted me. I walked around the side of the building past the meticulously manicured rose gardens and approached a heavy service door. It was unlocked just as she promised. I slipped inside, navigating the quiet carpeted back hallways of the country club. I moved like a ghost through the building, my emerald green silk gown rustling softly against the floor. I found the narrow wooden staircase leading up to the audiovisual control room and climbed the steps. The booth was a small, darkened room suspended directly above the main ballroom. It featured a wide tinted glass window that provided a sweeping, unobstructed view of the entire event space below. A young technician wearing a black headset gave me a silent nod as I entered. He handed me the secure wireless pairing code for the venue's massive projection system. I connected my tablet, verified that my files were locked and loaded, and stepped up to the glass to watch the show. The ballroom was a masterpiece of high society opulence. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a brilliant golden light over 50 round tables draped in crisp white linen. Towering centerpieces of white orchids and hydrangeas sat at the center of each table, surrounded by gleaming silver cutlery and crystal champagne flutes. The room was packed to absolute capacity. I saw the entire senior congregation of our church sitting near the front, including the head pastor and his wife. I saw local city council members, prominent business owners, and virtually every single member of Atlanta's Black elite. It was a sea of influence and wealth, all gathered to celebrate a man who did not actually possess either. My eyes drifted to the front of the room where a massive elevated stage had been constructed. Behind the crystal podium, two enormous projection screens currently displayed towering 10-foot-tall vanity portraits of my father looking thoughtfully into the distance. Seated at a long, lavish head table right below the stage was my family. They looked like royalty presiding over their loyal subjects. My mother Brenda was wearing a sparkling silver gown, waving gracefully to guests, and completely absorbing the attention she craved like oxygen. Jasmine was seated next to her wearing a designer dress that I had indirectly paid for, holding a glass of champagne, with a bright, artificial smile plastered across her face. Trent was sitting rigidly beside Jasmine. He was wearing a rented tuxedo that fit him poorly, and even from the balcony I could see the thick sheen of sweat on his forehead. He was constantly darting his eyes toward the exits, bouncing his knee nervously under the table. He knew his time was rapidly running out. He knew the bookies were looking for him. But tonight he was forced to play the part of the wealthy, successful husband for the cameras. And then there was my father. Reginald was standing near the edge of the stage, working the room with a wide, arrogant grin. He was in his absolute element. He was shaking hands, patting prominent politicians on the back, and accepting lavish congratulations for a 40-year business legacy that was built entirely on my stolen paychecks. He looked invincible. He truly believed he had beaten me. He thought that by banning me from the room, he had silenced the truth forever. At exactly 8 o'clock, the ambient music faded away. The main lights in the ballroom dimmed, plunging the audience into a dramatic hush. A single bright spotlight hit the center of the stage. My father adjusted his tailored jacket and walked proudly up the wooden steps. He took his place behind the crystal podium, gripping the edges with both hands as he looked out over the sea of faces. The crowd broke into thunderous, admiring applause. He let it wash over him for a long moment, soaking in the validation he so desperately needed, before raising a hand to quiet the room. "Thank you," Reginald began, his deep, booming voice echoing powerfully through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate this incredible milestone. 40 years ago, I started with nothing but a dream, a strong back, and a relentless work ethic. I built an empire from the ground up, fighting every single day to ensure that the Davis family name would command absolute respect in this great city." The crowd murmured in agreement. Aunt Beatrice, sitting in the front row, nodded enthusiastically. I looked down at this table. My father continued, gesturing grandly toward my mother and sister. I look at my beautiful wife, Brenda, who stood by my side through every trial. I look at my youngest daughter, Jasmine, who embodies the grace, the elegance, and the pure heart of our family line. She is the true heir to everything we have built. He paused, smiling warmly down at Trent. And I look at Trent, the son I never had. A brilliant young man who is carrying on our legacy of excellence in the business world. These are the people who make the late nights and the endless sacrifices worthwhile. This is what generational wealth is all about, passing the torch to those who have proven themselves worthy. Another round of polite applause rippled through the room. I stood in the dark booth, my finger hovering just inches above the glowing screen of my tablet. Then my father's demeanor abruptly shifted. He dropped his confident smile. He lowered his head, his shoulders slumping slightly as he feigned a look of deep, agonizing pain. He cleared his throat, leaning closer to the microphone, and the entire ballroom leaned in with him. However, Reginald said, his voice dropping to a somber theatrical whisper, true leadership requires making difficult, heartbreaking decisions to protect the family estate. Many of you have noticed that my eldest daughter Kendra is not sitting at our table tonight. A thick, uncomfortable silence settled over the room. People shifted in their seats. Whispers broke out among the church members in the back. It absolutely breaks my heart to say this publicly, my father announced, shaking his head slowly. But Kendra has lost her way. The corporate world has hardened her. She has allowed greed, jealousy, and bitterness to completely poison her heart. Recently, she attempted to maliciously manipulate our family finances. She tried to steal the very inheritance I built for her sister, all out of spite. Gasps echoed across the ballroom. My mother pulled a lace handkerchief from her purse and dabbed at her dry eyes. Jasmine looked down at her lap, playing the role of the devastated, betrayed sister with terrifying perfection. Because of her unforgivable actions, my father declared, his voice rising in righteous indignation. I have made the agonizing but necessary decision to protect my family. As of tonight, I am officially and permanently disinheriting Kendra. She is cut off from the Davis family estate. I only pray that one day she finds the help she so desperately needs. The crowd was stunned. The sheer audacity of his lie was breathtaking. He had just executed a flawless character assassination in front of 300 witnesses. He thought he had buried me. He thought the show was over. I smiled in the darkness of the audiovisual booth. I turned to the technician standing beside me. Turn on the floor microphone at table 12, I said calmly. It is time for the keynote presentation. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the main ballroom, stepping out of the darkened hallway and into the brilliant golden glow of the crystal chandeliers. The timing was absolute perfection. My father had just delivered his masterful, heartbreaking performance. His grand declaration of my disinheritance was still hanging heavy in the air, wrapping the silent, shocked crowd in a thick blanket of dramatic tension. He stood behind the podium with his head bowed, soaking in the collective sympathy of 300 high society guests. I stepped out of the shadows. For a brief moment, no one noticed me. All eyes were glued to the stage. Then a waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes widening. A woman seated at a back table turned her head following his gaze. She gasped, tapping the shoulder of the man next to her. Like a wave crashing toward the shoreline, the realization of my presence rippled rapidly from the back of the room to the front. I began my walk down the center aisle. My $8,000 emerald green silk gown rustled softly against the carpet, catching the light with every deliberate step. I kept my posture completely straight, my chin raised and my expression carved from pure ice. The crowd literally parted for me. People instinctively pulled their chairs and shrinking back as I moved past them. The whispers erupted instantly, a frantic buzzing that filled the massive space. My mother spotted me first. She was sitting at the lavish head table, dabbing her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. When she looked up and saw me walking down the aisle, the color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking hollow and terrified beneath her heavy makeup. She frantically grabbed my father's pant leg, pulling at the fabric. Reginald looked up, his fake, sorrowful expression shattered into a million pieces. The benevolent patriarch vanished, replaced by a man staring down the barrel of a loaded gun. "Security!" My father barked into the podium microphone, his voice sharp and panicked. "Escort her out of this building immediately. She is not on the guest list." Two massive security guards in tailored black suits immediately stepped forward from the perimeter of the room, moving to intercept me. My mother hissed at them, waving her hands frantically to hurry them up. Jasmine gripped the edges of the table, her knuckles white, her eyes darting nervously between me and the guards. but the guards never reached me. Lydia, the senior event coordinator, stepped out from the side curtains near the stage. She caught the eye of the head security guard and gave a sharp, definitive shake of her head. I was one of the largest premium investors in this country club. My personal investment portfolio essentially paid their salaries. The head guard stopped in his tracks, tapped his earpiece, and signaled to his partner. Without a single word, both men folded their hands behind their backs and stepped seamlessly back into the shadows. My father watched his absolute authority evaporate in real time. He gripped the edges of the crystal podium so tightly I thought it might crack under his weight. He looked at Lydia, but she simply turned her back and disappeared behind the curtain again. I reached table 12, which was positioned perfectly in the center of the room, just a few yards away from the elevated stage. Resting on the table was a spare floor microphone on a silver stand intended for guest toasts later in the evening. I reached out and pulled the microphone from its clip. The state-of-the-art sound system clicked on with a soft electronic hum, instantly silencing the hundreds of frantic whispers in the room. The absolute quiet was deafening. I looked directly up at the man who had spent my entire life treating me like a disposable asset. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not match the frantic, aggressive energy he always used to control our family. "Dad," I said. My voice was perfectly level, chillingly calm, and echoed powerfully off the vaulted ceilings. It is incredibly hard to disinherit someone from an estate that you do not own. A collective theatrical gasp ripped through the ballroom. I saw Aunt Beatrice cover her mouth with both hands in the front row, the very same aunt who had texted me hours earlier, calling me a traitor. The prominent church deacons exchanged alarmed, wide-eyed glances, leaning in closer to hear every single word. Trent looked like he was about to physically vomit. His face was slick with sweat, and he was actively scanning the side exits of the room, entirely ready to abandon his wife. Reginald froze. His face flushed a deep, furious crimson. He realized instantly that his narrative was collapsing, but his towering arrogance refused to let him surrender. He forced a loud, booming laugh. It was a desperate, hollow sound that echoed awkwardly through the speakers. He leaned back into his microphone, desperately trying to play the situation off to the bewildered crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, forcing a condescending, pitying smile. "Please forgive this unfortunate interruption. As I just mentioned to all of you, my daughter is deeply unwell. She is having a severe mental episode." He looked down at me, using the patronizing tone he usually reserved for unruly children. "Kendra, sweetheart, please put the microphone down before you embarrass yourself further. We are going to get you the psychiatric help you so desperately need." He turned toward the control booth window high above the floor. "Cut her audio," he commanded. "Turn off her microphone right now." I stood perfectly still. The audio did not cut out. The AV technician was on my payroll tonight. My father tapped his microphone, his smile straining at the edges. I said, "Cut the audio." He repeated, his voice rising in panic. "You cannot turn off the truth," I replied, my voice ringing crystal clear across the silent ballroom. "And you cannot gaslight 300 people into ignoring reality just because you are wearing a rented tuxedo." Jasmine stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Kendra, shut up," she screamed, completely abandoning her poised, elegant facade. "Security, get her out of here." I ignored my sister entirely. I unclasped my designer clutch and pulled out my digital tablet. I looked out at the sea of faces, making eye contact with the very people who had judged me, the people who had blindly believed my father's lies for decades. "Let us talk about this incredible legacy you built," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a diamond blade. "The legacy you just claimed to be protecting from my greed. Everyone in this room has been to the Davis family estate. You have all attended my mother's lavish Sunday dinners. You have all praised my father for his brilliant real estate investments. But I want you all to look closely at the screens behind him." I tapped the surface of my tablet. Instantly, the massive projection screens flanking the main stage flickered. The towering 10-foot-tall vanity portraits of Reginald Davis vanished in a flash of bright white light. The entire ballroom held its breath as the new slides loaded onto the displays, projected for the entire Atlanta high society to see, were heavily redacted but undeniably clear legal property deeds. The massive black text of the legal headers stood out in stark contrast against the white backgrounds. The official county seals were visible. The signature lines were magnified. It was irrefutable state-certified proof. And right at the top of the primary document listed under the sole ownership registry was not the name Reginald Davis. It was Zenith Holdings, my completely private limited liability company. The collective gasp from the 300 guests was so sharp, it sounded like all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of the grand ballroom. I stood near table 12, the silver microphone cool and solid in my hand. I did not break eye contact with my father. I wanted him to feel the exact weight of his entire fraudulent existence crashing down on his shoulders. For 5 years, my father had paraded around Atlanta society, hosting lavish Sunday dinners and holiday parties in that beautiful 5-bedroom colonial house. He had told every deacon, every politician, and every relative in this room that his brilliant real estate investments had secured that home. But the document glowing 10 feet tall on the projection screen told the absolute undeniable truth. "Let me explain exactly what you are looking at," I said, my voice echoing evenly across the silent room. 5 years ago, my father defaulted on his primary mortgage. He had squandered whatever meager savings he had left on failed business ventures and maintaining a lifestyle he simply could not afford. The bank was exactly 30 days away from seizing that property and putting my parents on the street. I paused, letting the reality sink into the minds of the audience. The church elders sitting in the front row looked absolutely horrified. To save them from the ultimate public humiliation, I purchased the house in a private cash sale directly from the bank through my corporate entity Zenith Holdings, I continued. My father is not a self-made real estate mogul. He does not own an estate. He is my tenant, and he has not paid a single dime of rent in 5 years. I swiped my finger across the screen of my tablet. The massive displays behind the stage instantly shifted to a new set of highly detailed financial documents. But the house was only the foundation of the lie, I said, pacing slowly in front of the tables. Look at the screens. These are the corporate lease agreements for the luxury vehicles my parents drive to church every single Sunday. Next to them are the credit card statements that fund my mother's designer wardrobe, the catered parties, and the very country club membership that allowed them to stand in this room tonight. I pointed up at the screen, my voice ringing with absolute authority. Every single luxury this family enjoys has been directly funded by my corporate paychecks. I sacrificed my own peace, my own savings, and my youth to maintain my father's fragile ego. And in return, he stood on this stage tonight and attempted to destroy my professional reputation simply because I finally decided to stop paying for his delusions. My mother, Brenda, completely crumbled. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as the carefully constructed illusion of her high society life shattered into a million pieces. There was no theatrical fainting spell this time. There was no playing the victim. She was pinned down by the hard projected evidence of her own parasitic greed, completely exposed to the judgment of the very people she had spent decades trying to impress. Reginald was paralyzed. His jaw hung slack. A thick sheen of sweat coated his forehead, gleaming under the bright stage lights. He gripped the sides of the crystal podium, swaying slightly, as if he might actually collapse. He opened his mouth to defend himself, to spin another lie, but his silver tongue had completely failed him. The microphone picked up his heavy, panicked breathing, broadcasting his terror to the entire room. I turned my attention to the head table, locking eyes with Jasmine. She was sitting rigidly in her chair, her face completely drained of color. The smug, arrogant sister who had thrown a glass of water at me during the legal deposition was gone. "And then there is Trent," I said, my voice dropping to a sharp, dangerous tone. I tapped my tablet one final time. The screens shifted from the vehicle leases to the offshore wire transfer receipts that Valerie's forensic accountant had uncovered. The numbers were massive, bold, and highlighted in red. The son my father never had, I announced, gesturing toward the head table. The man who tried to sue me on Friday for a trust fund that does not even exist. Trent has spent the last 3 years intercepting the household allowance I provided for my sister. He did not invest it in a consulting business. He wired over $200,000 to illegal sports betting syndicates in the Caribbean. The ballroom erupted. It was no longer just murmurs and gasps. People were literally standing up from their seats. The sheer magnitude of the scandal was too much for the polite society crowd to process quietly. Aunt Beatrice was fanning herself frantically. The politicians at table 4 were urgently whispering to their aides, no doubt calculating how quickly they could distance themselves from the Davis family name. Jasmine let out a piercing, hysterical sob. She turned in her chair and began hitting Trent in the chest, screaming at him through her tears. "How could you do this to us?" she shrieked, completely forgetting her poised, elegant facade. I ignored the chaos. I placed the silver microphone back onto its stand. I unclasped my emerald green designer clutch and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. I turned away from table 12 and walked straight toward the elevated stage. The crowd watched my every move in breathless fascination. The only sound louder than the whispers was the sharp, rhythmic clicking of my heels against the hardwood floor. I walked up the wooden steps of the stage, my silk gown flowing behind me. I stopped right in front of the crystal podium. My father looked incredibly small. Stripped of his booming voice, his fake wealth, and his tailored arrogance, he was nothing more than a terrified, broken old man who had finally been caught in his own trap. He looked at the manila envelope in my hand, his eyes wide with dread. I did not need a microphone for my final words. I stepped close enough that only he could hear the absolute finality in my voice. "Since you wanted to talk about my inheritance in front of all these people," I said, smoothly holding out the envelope, "here is your 30-day eviction notice. You are officially and legally removed from my property. You are my tenants and your rent is severely past due. You have exactly 1 month to pack your things and vacate the premises." Reginald slowly reached out with a trembling hand and took the envelope. He looked down at it like it was a death sentence. He had spent 40 years building a kingdom made entirely of sand, and I had just summoned the hurricane. I turned my back on him. I walked slowly down the stairs of the stage, my head held high. I glanced over at the head table one last time. Trent was not staying to defend his wife. He was not staying to face the consequences of his massive gambling debts or the humiliation of his exposed lies. While Jasmine had her face buried in her hands, weeping uncontrollably, Trent quietly stood up from his chair. He kept his head down, practically crawling through the shadows along the perimeter of the room. He slipped silently out the side door of the ballroom, abandoning my sister to face the absolute ruin of her life entirely alone. I walked straight down the center aisle, the crowd parting for me once again. I did not look back. I pushed through the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom and stepped out into the cool, quiet hallway, leaving the blazing wreckage of the Davis family legacy burning brightly behind me. 6 months have passed since the night I walked out of the Oak Ridge Country Club and left my family to drown in the shallow puddles of their own making. The changing of the seasons brought a profound, uninterrupted quiet to my life. At first, the total silence on my phone felt strange. For my entire adult life, my phone had been a constant source of anxiety, buzzing with demands, manufactured emergencies, and thinly veiled insults. Now it only rings with good news, profitable investments, and the voices of people who actually care about my well-being. Tonight, the Atlanta skyline is painted in deep shades of violet and gold. I am hosting a Sunday dinner on the expansive private terrace of my downtown penthouse. The air is warm, carrying the rich, savory scent of roasted garlic rosemary and the expensive red wine breathing on the table. But this gathering looks absolutely nothing like the tense, miserable performances my mother used to orchestrate at the old house. There is no walking on eggshells here. There is no frantic need to impress anyone, no biting remarks about my relationship status, and no hidden financial agendas. The long custom oak dining table is surrounded by my chosen family. Valerie is sitting to my right wearing a stunning silk jumpsuit, laughing loudly at a story being told by one of my senior mentors from the firm. Surrounding them are close friends, brilliant colleagues, and women who have supported me through every stage of my career. I stand near the edge of the terrace, resting my hands on the cool glass railing, just watching them. My guests are passing plates of incredible food, pouring wine for each other, and sharing genuine, unforced laughter. I am still footing the bill for this lavish dinner, just like I used to do for my biological family. But the difference is monumental. I provide for these people out of love, abundance, and mutual respect. They celebrate my success instead of trying to siphon it. They add immense value to my life rather than draining it. Valerie steps away from the table and walks over to me, handing me a fresh glass of Pinot Noir. She clinks her glass against mine, the crystal ringing with a clear, beautiful sound. To the Empire, she says, a warm, knowing smile spreading across her face. To the Empire, I reply, taking a slow sip of the wine. We look out over the glittering city lights together. Through Valerie, I occasionally hear the faint, distant echoes of my past life, mostly through the legal network. The updates are brief and predictable. My parents are still living in that cramped two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. Without my money to artificially inflate his ego, my father has faded into total obscurity. He no longer wears custom suits, and he certainly does not give speeches about his grand legacy. The high society crowd he so desperately worshipped abandoned him the second the foreclosure documents hit the projection screen. Jasmine is currently working a minimum wage retail job at a suburban mall to pay off the massive mountain of credit card debt Trent left her with. The divorce was finalized rapidly. Trent vanished across state lines, likely still running from the offshore bookies he owes hundreds of thousands of dollars to. Jasmine tried to reach out to me twice from a restricted number, leaving tearful voicemails begging for a fresh start. I deleted the messages before she even finished her sentences. I have absolutely no desire to witness their misery, just as I have no desire to ever fix it. The universe has a remarkable way of returning the exact energy you put into it, and they are finally paying their own tabs. I turn my back to the city and look at the beautiful life I have cultivated. The journey to get here was not easy. Walking away from the people who share your blood goes against everything society conditions you to do. We are taught to forgive endlessly, to absorb the abuse in the name of tradition, and to protect the family secret at all costs. But the truth is, shared DNA does not entitle anyone to a front row seat to your destruction. I think back to that upscale steakhouse exactly 6 months ago. I think about my father slamming his heavy scotch glass onto the white linen tablecloth. I think about the supreme arrogance in his eyes when he looked at me and announced to the entire restaurant that he should have stopped at one kid. He intended for those words to break me. He wanted to reduce me to a frightened, obedient child, desperate for his validation. But standing here tonight, surrounded by wealth I built with my own hands, and people who genuinely love me, I realized that his cruelest insult was actually the truest statement he ever made. He absolutely should have stopped at one kid. Because the one child he threw away, the one he treated like a walking ATM and a burden, was the only one capable of actually building the generational wealth he spent his entire life pretending to have. I am the legacy. I am the foundation. And sometimes the best way to honor your ancestors is not by blindly serving the toxic people who came before you. The best way to honor your lineage is by becoming the generation that finally cuts the dead weight, breaks the cycle of abuse, and builds a genuine empire of authentic peace. If you are listening to this story and you are currently suffocating under the weight of toxic family expectations, I need you to hear this loud and clear. Your worth is not defined by their inability to appreciate you. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep people warm, especially when those same people would never cross an ocean for you. Setting boundaries will feel terrifying at first. They will call you selfish, they will launch smear campaigns, and they will try to make you the villain of their story. Let them. Let them keep their narrative while you keep your peace. The silence on the other side of that guilt is the most beautiful sound you will ever hear. It is the sound of freedom. It is the sound of your life finally becoming your own. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If my story resonated with you, if you have ever had to make the agonizing decision to walk away from people you loved to save yourself, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We are building a community of strength, resilience, and unapologetic boundaries here. I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Let me know where you found the courage to stand up for yourself and how your life changed when you finally said enough is enough. Stay strong, protect your energy, and remember that the best revenge is always massive, unbothered success. 6 months have passed since the heavy mahogany doors of the Oak Ridge Country Club closed behind me, shutting out the chaos and the lies of my past. Tonight, the air high above the streets of Atlanta is warm and fragrant. I am hosting Sunday dinner on the expansive private terrace of my penthouse. The city skyline stretches out in every direction, a glittering ocean of glass and light beneath a deep violet sky. A soft jazz melody floats from the wireless speakers, blending perfectly with the rich, savory aroma of roasted lamb, garlic, herb potatoes, and grilled asparagus resting on the custom oak dining table. This gathering looks and feels absolutely nothing like the tense, miserable performances my mother used to orchestrate at the old estate. There are no forced prayers designed to subtly insult someone at the table. There are no passive-aggressive comments about my relationship status or my demanding career. There is no walking on eggshells desperately trying to avoid triggering my father's fragile ego or my sister's deep-seated insecurities. Instead, there is only genuine, unforced joy. The long table is surrounded by my chosen family. Valerie is sitting to my right wearing a stunning emerald silk blouse, laughing loudly and freely at a story being told by Silas. Silas is a retired financial executive, a brilliant older black gentleman who took me under his wing when I first entered the ruthless world of wealth management. He and his wife Clara are sitting across from me holding hands and sharing a bottle of expensive Cabernet that I pulled from my private reserve. Surrounding them are close friends, brilliant colleagues, and women who have supported me through every stage of my career. I sit at the head of the table, but I do not demand obedience the way my father did. I simply facilitate the warmth. I watch my guests pass plates of incredible food, pour wine for one another, and engage in conversations that uplift and inspire. I am still footing the bill for this lavish dinner, just like I used to do for my biological family. But the emotional return on my investment is entirely different. I provide for these people out of love, abundance, and mutual respect. They celebrate my success instead of trying to siphon it. They add immense, immeasurable value to my life rather than draining it dry. Silas gently taps his silver fork against his crystal wine glass. The rhythmic clinking sound brings the table to a comfortable, respectful silence. He stands up slowly, smoothing the front of his tailored vest, and raises his glass toward me. "I want to make a toast," Silas says, his voice carrying the deep, soothing resonance of a man who has lived a full and authentic life. When I first met Kendra, I knew she was brilliant with numbers. I knew she was going to dominate the corporate world. But watching her over these last 6 months, I have seen a completely different kind of brilliance. He looks directly at me, his eyes filled with profound pride. "Generational wealth is a phrase we throw around a lot in our community," Silas continues. "We talk about passing down property, passing down stocks, and passing down money. But true generational wealth is also about passing down peace. It is about having the absolute courage to break toxic cycles so that the people who come after you do not have to carry the heavy, suffocating burdens of the past." Kendra, you did not just secure your financial freedom this year, you secured your soul. To you, my dear. To Kendra, Valerie echoes loudly, raising her glass high. To Kendra, the rest of the table chimes in their voices, wrapping around me like a warm embrace. I raise my own glass, taking a slow, deep sip of the dark red wine. The flavor is rich and complex, grounding me in the present moment. A genuine smile spreads across my face. "Thank you," I say quietly, feeling a sudden, overwhelming wave of gratitude wash over my chest. As the dinner winds down and the conversation shifts to lighter topics, I excuse myself from the table. I take my wine glass and walk over to the edge of the terrace. I rest my hands on the cool glass railing, letting the evening breeze brush against my skin. I look out over the sprawling city, watching the headlights of thousands of cars moving along the highways below like tiny ribbons of light. I allow myself a quiet moment to reflect on the journey. The fallout from the gala was absolute and permanent. I lost my biological family. I do not know where my father is currently living, and I do not know how my mother is coping without her high society status. I know Jasmine is somewhere struggling to rebuild her life from scratch after Trent abandoned her. I lost all of them. But as I stand here breathing in the clean, peaceful air, I realize with absolute certainty that I did not actually lose anything of value. You cannot lose people who were never truly on your side to begin with. When the designated scapegoat finally decides to walk away, the entire toxic family system collapses because they no longer have anyone to project their failures onto. They were forced to look at their own reflections, and the reality completely destroyed them. I did not ruin their lives. I simply removed my financial shielding and allowed them to experience the natural consequences of their own horrible behavior. I gained my freedom. I gained my life. My corporate portfolios are thriving. My real estate investments are multiplying without the constant drain of my father's hidden debts. But more importantly, my heart is incredibly light. I no longer flinch when my phone rings. I no longer dread the holidays. I wake up every single morning feeling safe in my own home. I swirl the remaining wine in my glass, a deep sense of poetic justice settling into my bones. I think back to that upscale steakhouse exactly 6 months ago. I hear my father's booming voice echoing across the white linen tablecloth. I see the supreme arrogance in his eyes when he looked at me and announced to the entire restaurant that he should have stopped at one kid. He intended for those words to break me. He wanted to reduce me to a frightened, obedient child who would hand over her credit cards just to buy back his conditional love. But looking out over the empire I built with my own 2 hands, I realized that his cruelest insult was actually the most profoundly accurate statement he ever made. He absolutely should have stopped at one kid, because the one child he threw away, the one he treated like a walking bank account, and an endless burden, was the only one actually capable of building the generational wealth he spent his entire life desperately pretending to have. Sometimes the best way to honor your ancestors is not by blindly serving the toxic people who share your blood. The absolute best way to honor your lineage is to become the generation that finally cuts the dead weight and builds a legacy of undeniable truth. If you are listening to this story and you are currently suffocating under the weight of toxic family expectations, I need you to hear this loud and clear. Your worth is not defined by their inability to appreciate you. You are never obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep other people warm. Setting boundaries will feel terrifying at first. They will call you selfish, they will launch smear campaigns, and they will try their hardest to make you the villain of their story. Let them. Let them keep their fake narrative while you keep your peace. The silence on the other side of that guilt is the most beautiful sound you will ever hear. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If my story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We are building a community of strength, resilience, and unapologetic boundaries. I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Let me know how your life changed when you finally said, "Enough is enough." Stay strong, protect your energy, and always remember that the ultimate revenge is massive, unbothered success.